We're going to speak today about women, power, Hillary Clinton, and making the impossible, or what seems impossible, possible. An applause for our invited guest today, please. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Denise. I am a writer, political scientist, professor, activist, and a very proud feminist and very proud daughter of an empowered young woman who, as we speak, is finishing up her first year at Yale, which would not have been possible in 1972 when Yale didn't accept women. So we have come a long way. What is a powerful woman, Melanne?
Well, let me just say for starters that it's a pleasure for me to be here with you, Denise. You have achieved so much, and we have followed your commentary over the years. And to be back here at the forum. I have been to the Deauville Forum many times. I have been to Myanmar, and now to be in Mexico and see the vitality of powerful women here in this country, joined by all the good men to really make a difference here. I think a woman with power today is one who has agency, has certain resources, whether they are in terms of her education, her position in her professions, in other situations that she finds herself. But it's how she uses that power that's important to me. And I have recently written a book called Fast Forward, because what I see in terms of women's progress is that no matter where women find themselves, whether they're at the top, in the C-suites running a country, whether they're in middle management trying to move up, or whether they're at the grassroots level, really creating change on the front lines, increasingly they are combining their position with purpose. Purpose to make a difference, connecting with others, bringing about change, whether it's change for society more broadly or for women and girls. They are the change makers today around the world. And to me, that is the personification of power.
So a woman with power has agency, has purpose, and has a cause, and has an idea of how to make a difference in the world. There are many women in Mexico who I know who are still struggling to achieve that sense of power. And in the recent book that Sheryl Sandberg published, Lean In, she argued that aside from all of the structural issues that impede equality for women, there is an inner obstacle that many women still carry around, and it's insecurity. It's the inability to understand that they have a place or a right to be in the world. Do you agree that there is an inner obstacle? And if so, how do women overcome that?
You know, it's so interesting, Denise, because in the book that I co-authored, we interviewed some 70 women at all levels, very powerful women, many. Each of them told us in their own way the fears that they had and how they had to shake off those fears, that lack of confidence, which plagues women. And I have seen this the world over. It's a real burden to grow in confidence, to believe in yourself, to be able to, as the entrepreneurs here know, to be able to take risk and not fear to fail. And it is that fear, maybe we're just programmed to always be first, be the A students, but it is through failure, through test, through that ability to overcome, that we are in line for much greater achievement. But I have seen this everywhere. We have to get over those insecurities, but it is lack of confidence, it is fear of failure.
My sense is that the lack of confidence of many women I know in this country derives from the lack of education. Years ago, I edited a book called Cries and Whispers, where 39 women talked about moments of insecurity, moments of surprise that had defined them, tempestuous moments that had made them who they were. And at least half of the women lamented their lack of formal education because their parents didn't believe that it was necessary. And I think that a way of overcoming that fear of risk and that insecurity is by educating women, and that Mexico will become a different and better country when it educates its women. I always tell my students at the beginning of the semester that I want them to earn good grades, be good citizens, but that they have to leave the class promising me that they're going to earn a PhD. I don't care in what. Do you agree with me about education being a trampoline for women and an aid or an imperative for self-confidence?
I think education is fundamental. It is critically important. And I was thinking about the time when I was working in the Clinton administration in the White House about 20 years ago. And Hillary Clinton at the time, as First Lady, really took on the cause of educating girls. Now, 20 years later, we are just about at parity all over the world on primary education. One of the huge challenges we still have is adolescent education. And why is it so important? You talk about it in terms of a woman's security, but starting out as that girl, the one who gets the education is able to be a more significant, instrumental leader in her own family. She's able to space her children. She is able to feed them better, to send them to school, and for every year of schooling, earn a better job that is more remunerative. Now, we're talking primary, we're talking adolescent as it goes up. A woman with a higher degree is obviously liberated in ways that are extraordinarily important in enabling her to be able to take her place in those places where women more often than not weren't. And I think closing that gap is really important. Now, in my own country, and it's not just true for the United States anymore, at the university level, there are more women graduates than their male counterparts. I would be happy with parity. And at the graduate level, it exceeds that. But despite that progress, we don't see comparable opportunities for women as they get into middle management to rise to the top or to achieve some of those top positions that should be commensurate with their education. And in the STEM field, the scientific world, the computer world, despite the large numbers of women at the university level, only a small number is enrolling in those fields comparatively, and something happens to girls along the way that turns them off and tells them they don't belong. Yeah. And so in the tech world, which is a very much a 21st century place for all of us, women are still having a tough time.
Yes, and we're not going to argue here that, as Larry Summers did, that there's a genetic predisposition of women to not be in science or math.
And he's been doing penance for that ever since.
Yes, well, he was forced to leave the presidency of Harvard because of that. Mm-hmm. But going back to the topic of women in the world, despite the numbers that you cite of women being in colleges and advanced degrees, when you look at the numbers around the world, we are so far from equality in terms of representation in parliaments, women who are presidents or CEOs, a truly equitable equal world would be one in which women ran half the countries and men ran half the households. Why are we not there yet?
Well, we certainly aren't at parity, but we are making progress. The most difficult area for women globally to transcend is political participation. Now, here in Mexico, you've actually made greater strides and are in a higher position on the world list because of the quota that you've adopted. So it's that kind of affirmative step that's opened doors that ordinarily would be closed. In terms of so much other comparable economic participation or women's participation in politics and related fields, I think one of the big differences that's occurring today is the evidence-based case that we should not for 1 second underestimate. It's been talked about here this morning, this afternoon, yesterday, because today the data is in. And the data is telling us that you cannot grow economies, you cannot create jobs, you cannot have inclusive prosperity unless women are fully participating economically. You cannot have profitable companies, as you might want to have, unless you have women making decisions. You cannot be advantaged in your company unless you take advantage of diversity in your design, in taking advantage of women's purchasing power today. This is trending in a different way. So while I firmly believe, as I know you do, as I'm sure everyone in this room does, that fundamentally we are talking about women's rights. But today we can say, this is not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. It is the strategic thing to do. And if I could not persuade the skeptics, mostly the male decision makers because they dominate that space, on the basis of the right thing to do, you can't ignore the evidence-based case.
Right, but the thing is, we have to convince the world about how this is the right thing to do, for economic reasons, for political reasons. Yet it still remains an issue of making the world understand women's rights. And that entails fighting for them. I'd like for the women in this room who consider themselves feminists and who recognize that openly to raise their hands. See, not all of the hands are up, because feminism today has a negative connotation. My beloved daughter at Yale does not call herself a feminist because of the negative connotation that feminism has. And yet, she's there because you fought, and I fought, and many of my friends who are in this room marched for rights. How do we convince women and men to be feminists today?
Well, I agree, and it's true in my own country, that the word feminism in many ways was hijacked by people who opposed gender equality. And it was the connotations that they pulled out as they hijacked the term, and they actually created a pejorative. It became something you didn't want to associate with. But when you think about it, you know, I remember one day Hillary Clinton, right after the Beijing Women's Conference that took place now, we just marked the anniversary 20 years ago, she was on a radio broadcast. And she got a call from a gentleman in the Middle East, and he said, "Mrs. Clinton, just what did you mean when you said that women's rights were human rights?" And you know, 20 years ago in Beijing, that was an extraordinary thing to say. Human rights were women's rights, and women's rights were human rights. Women are human. They deserve all of the same rights and have those rights.
It's interesting because that is the foundational definition of feminism.
Exactly.
And somehow its meaning
So-
has been manipulated, changed, ill-defined, and I think we need to go back to that essential definition. A feminist is someone who considers a woman a human being. Now raise your hand if you consider yourselves feminists.
There you go. So what she said to the caller that day was, "Sir, just think of all the rights a man has. You can participate fully in the economy, you can run in politics, you can, for the most part, be free from violence, you can get a good education, health care. Well, women deserve all the same." And that is, as you said, Denise, that is the essence. And I think we do have to take it all back.
So moving on to another topic quickly, because I'm sure that people here want to know your views on this. Should Hillary Clinton be elected because she's a woman?
No. She is, first of all, someone, in my view, eminently qualified to be President of the United States, a candidate who also happens to be a woman, which I think is a great addition to that. But first of all, women are not monolithic. We all know about the variety that we come in. We all have different political views, but I think fundamentally, we have never put up in the political sphere for the presidency a female candidate of her qualifications. And that is, we talk about fundamentals, that is the fundamental attribute, but also the fact that she is a woman would be incredibly significant for my country to finally break this barrier.
I agree with you. I've only met Hillary Clinton once when she came to Mexico as Secretary of State years ago, and I will never forget. It was a small dinner, about 20 women, and the day before I had published an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times about her and what she should say in Mexico. And as we were standing in line and she was greeting us, I said, "Hello, I'm Denise Dresser," and she said, "Very good piece in the LA Times yesterday." And the reason I mention this, it's not out of being presumptuous. It's about the fact that she'd done her homework. She had read the briefing book. She had remembered the name of the person who had written the op-ed. I think she is the person, and I don't say woman, I think she is the person who knows more about public policy in the United States today than anybody else in the field. Applause, please, for her. There was a recent article in the New Yorker that argued that Hillary Clinton should be allowed to boast about her accomplishments instead of trying to minimize them, because ambition is not viewed well in the United States or anywhere. Do you agree with that argument?
Well, I think she does. I'm surprised to hear that, actually, because she, as a candidate, talks about what she's achieved and why she would be qualified for the position.
But people criticize her for that, for being ambitious.
There is a double standard for female candidates. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but I'm sure you are. And a woman who is ambitious is a woman you don't want to trust and you don't want to like, because there is something wrong with an ambitious woman. However, if a man is ambitious, that is an extraordinary attribute that he possesses. And why shouldn't a woman be ambitious? I used to have this debate with reporters who would call me and say, "Oh, but she's so ambitious." This was when she was running for the Senate in New York, and she was still First Lady. And I said, what is wrong with ambition to make a difference? I hope we all have ambition. Ambition is a good word, but you're right. And there are so many of those double standards that are applied to women. There was a commentator on television who was describing why he doesn't like Hillary as a candidate. And he said, she yells too much. And I have never heard a male candidate, no matter how loudly he yelled, being commented on as a pejorative.
Oh, absolutely. In Mexico, as someone who does political analysis or women in many other fields, I'm sure you've heard the words applied to yourself as strident,
Yes.
visceral, too tough, harsh, una cabrona. How should I explain that to you, that word? How do I translate that word to you? A hard ass, a bitch, a bitch.
There have been people in the United States who've used that term applied to a certain other female candidate.
So I've seen that there are supporters of Bernie Sanders who say that they would rather, if he doesn't win the nomination, that they would rather vote for Trump than to vote for a woman. Do you think the United States is a sexist society?
I have not heard that. I have heard supporters of Bernie Sanders saying, well, they're not ready to support Hillary, but not because she's a woman. I think there are plenty of sexists in my country, just as there are all over the world, who aren't prepared to accept a woman as a president, as someone in the highest office. But we've gone through this in the military. We've gone through it educating girls in universities, as you pointed out with your daughter. When I started college at Georgetown, there were no women in the college. We were in a couple of tiny schools. We have made progress in significant ways, and society has adjusted to it. I think that's why it's important to break the barrier, because we create a model that did not previously exist that says, yes, we have the capacities, the competencies, the experience to equally do these jobs. And until that happens, it becomes outside the norm.
Why do you think in this presidential campaign so much attention has been paid to Hillary Clinton's hair, her clothes, her personal life, the way she speaks? Going back to that double standard, how do you break with that?
And it's not just Hillary Clinton. I have spent time with women leaders in many countries who tell me the same thing. In fact, I was at a meeting not too long ago when there were two female presidents from Europe, and one said, every day I'm in the paper being castigated because of my hair or what I wear. And the other one said, look at me. I never change my hairdo, and I wear the same kind of clothes every single day because otherwise it's a total distraction for them. And I don't know what it is, but it is a fact. You never comment on the guy's necktie, his hair being disheveled, his glasses being cockeyed.
Although
none of that.
One cannot help but comment on Donald Trump's hair.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. But it is rare that that happens. But I don't know when this will change. It has been going on for some time now. And again, I think it's the achievements. I'll tell you a quick story. When Hillary became First Lady, First Ladies have a very difficult position. There's no job description. Everybody thinks they know what you should do. You inherit the job by virtue of your marriage. And yet, if you're a professional, if you think you have something to give back, if it moves your husband's administration forward, you want to make a difference. The newspapers had a very difficult time with her when she became First Lady because they wanted to keep putting her on the social pages of the paper, and then she'd get involved in healthcare, or she'd do something on education, or she'd do something on employment, and they were going back and forth trying to figure out Well, how can a woman arrange the flowers for a state dinner and then give one of the most eloquent speeches on healthcare reform? We can't seem to cope with the multifaceted nature of all of the work that we do. We can and do every single day a variety of tasks that don't diminish one from another. But when it comes to the political realm, there is still a struggle in terms of accepting a woman who can demonstrate these different facets in her life.
I appreciate you saying that, and I hope it's a lesson that women listening to us take away. The multifaceted nature of being a woman. I, for example, am an expert folder of napkins. I was a waitress when I was in high school, so I can fold napkins like the best restaurant in the world. And yet in the evenings, I can take on any politician in Mexico. So let's embrace our multifaceted nature. An applause to us as great women. I have a final question. What would your message be for the daughters of the women sitting in this room? For the ones who are coming behind, for the next generation?
For them to understand that they are where they are because they stand on the shoulders of so many who have struggled, worked, made every effort imaginable to open those doors. I think the worst thing is for a woman to make her way up the ladder, then pull up the ladder behind her so the others can't come up. I think it's equally bad if we don't tell our daughters what they inherited. In my own country, the suffragettes who struggled for the right to vote, the women and men who went to the first Equal Rights Convention. We are where we are because of them. In our Congress, even though we have a much smaller number than you have in your parliament, women have come together across both parties to tackle violence against women and create one of the strongest laws. They have created equal opportunity for women in sports. They have taken on issues that would never be on the table but for their efforts. We have to recognize those efforts, and we have to build on them, because the next generation is going to be asked to tackle the challenges of their day, but they will only be able to do that because all of us are working every day to open the doors wider and make the possible truly possible.
Thank you, and for the women who are here, please take this with you and hang it on your heart. The message that you are standing on the shoulders of others and that you have a moral obligation to pave the road for those who come behind you. And you have the moral obligation to instill in your daughters the legitimacy of ambition and the fire in the belly to change the world. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Melanne.